get so lonely, waiting for you. You are the only thing to help her through. Don't take her for granted. She has a hard time. You got to know she's the sensitive kind.
Where does your power lie as you move across the southern sky?
You have to keep going, there's a lot of us. Thank you. Better. Much better. Much better. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Kate Moss, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this very special event to celebrate 20 years of the Women's Prize for Fiction. Another round of applause, I think, for that. So tonight, and for one night only, the Jersey Boys are ceding the stage to the Baileys girls and a couple of boys. Hi, boys. So after what was the first decade of the Orange Prize, now of course the Baileys Women's Prize for Fiction, we marked that occasion by choosing one of those novels to stand as the best of the best. In 2005, that novel was Small Island by Andrea Levy. Yeah, I tell you, we've got a lot to get through. Maybe we'll just hold the applause now. And so now it's 2015, and now we are 20. And so to celebrate that second decade, we invited the chairs of those judging panels to choose their best of the best, the novel that most reflects the founding principles, the ambition, the joy, the values, and the wonder for all of us who've been involved, that is the Women's Prize for Fiction. So earlier today, after 2 weeks of fantastic programming on BBC Radio 4 Woman's Hour and a wonderful online and in-store campaign with our bookselling partner Waterstones, the choice of the Women's Hour listeners for their best of the best was announced. But will the listeners' vote be the same as the vote from the chairs on the stage? You are going to have to wait for a little longer to find out. So what we're going to do is we're going to remind everybody of the 10 exceptional novels that have won the Women's Prize for Fiction in the past decade. A judge from each of those panels is going to come and give a quick summary of why they love the book so much and their winner, as it were. And we're going in strict chronological order. So you cannot read anything into this, ladies and gentlemen. So when they start and come up, there are no clues here at all. And then once we've celebrated all of those winning novels, I'm delighted to say that we have an incredible lineup of award-winning, brilliant actors, writers, and directors of stage and screens large and small. Stanley Tucci, Sia Kiwa, Prasanna Pawanaraja, and Sheila Hancock, all of whom have given up their evening to join us here. You can give them an applause, actually. So first up to the lectern to get us going for this evening is the presenter, broadcaster and bee specialist, Martha Carney, who chaired the 2006 judging panel. They chose On Beauty by Zadie Smith. Martha.
Well, I'm feeling the spirit of the Jersey Boys, but don't worry, I'm not going to sing or dance, which is a blessed relief. Now, as a bit of a veteran of book prizes, I know that when the boxes of novels arrive, and blimey, there are a lot of boxes usually, they'll be filled with unspeakable gloom. The bitter relationships, cruelty to children, nervous breakdowns, traumatic deaths. Somebody thinks there's almost an equation between how seriously a book's treated with the bleak nature of its subject matter. In fact, that was a complaint about the winners of the first 10 prizes of the award when we discussed them on Woman's Hour in those days. So for me, it was really wonderful to open On Beauty back in 2006 and realise what a different kind of book it was. It's an extremely funny and warm novel. The setting is an American college, for the most part, but this is so much more than any other campus novels you may have read. At its heart is a collision between two very different families. One's a liberal one, the other much more conservative. A short-lived romance between the younger generations provokes horror on both sides. And the clash of values that is explored here, I think, reflects the cultural wars, which is at the heart of so many modern debates. And it's underpinned in the book by really extreme, bitterly scholarly arguments about Rembrandt. As a daughter of an academic, I know just how vicious those arguments can get. Zadie Smith has an absolutely brilliant ear, I think, for depicting how people really speak. When each character talks, it's so vivid, you can hear them instantly inside your head. And there are so many different voices, even within this rather small world of the campus, like the teenager, Levi, who desperately wants to pretend that he's not middle class and aspires to be a hardcore street rapper. I think many of us probably know people, teenagers like that. But the puncturing of his pretension is done in a very tender manner. The sheer physicality of the descriptions of characters means that we come to see them instantly in our mind's eye. Early on, we're told how Levi's mother, Kiki, wraps her hair and how her weight itself has somehow come to define her identity. The tensions in her marriage and her husband's frailties are quite subtly described, and Zadie Smith swiftly, deftly switches from female to male perspective without any kind of judgment. As Natasha said in our discussions, the book works brilliantly at the level of the sentence, not just the broader structure. And finally, there's the very witty, I think, underpinning of the book. It's a homage to Howard's End, which in a way could sound pretentious, but it's honestly not at all. It's updated. It begins with Jerome's emails rather than the letters in the original book by A.M. Forster. The unconventional Belsies, like Forster's Bohemian Schlegels, are contrasted with this much more conservative family. And this literary game, I think, is characteristic of Zadie Smith's work. She has a playful intelligence, which is worn lightly, which pleases the reader who understands the references, but certainly doesn't alienate people who don't want to stretch that far. I was quite worried when I went back to On Beauty to read it for this exercise, but when Kate Moss asks you to do something, you never say no. And I was worried that I would see more, I was worried that I would see more flaws in the book than when I'd first read it and enjoyed it back in 2006. But actually, to my relief, it has more than stood the test of time because of her skills as a writer. 2006 was a very, very strong shortlist. We had Hilary Mantel, Ali Smith, Sarah Waters, Nicole Krauss, also in contention. So you can imagine how heated our discussions were. I think poor Kate had to stay up till past midnight while we argued it all out. But I'm very pleased to say that On Beauty, with its humour and its intelligence, was certainly a deserved winner.
And now to read from Zadie Smith's On Beauty, please welcome Stanley Tucci.
In this extract, we meet the matriarch of the Belsey family, Kiki, and her son Jerome, who is back at home in Boston after a stay and an affair in London. Kiki cupped Jerome's face in her hands. She stared at him, seeking a refracted image of the girl who had caused all this misery. But Jerome had not given his mother any details when it happened, and he wasn't going to give her any now. It was a matter of an impossible translation. His mother wanted to know about a girl, but it wasn't about a girl, or rather, it wasn't just about the girl. Jerome had fallen in love with a family. He felt he couldn't tell his own family this fact. It was easier for them to believe that last year was Jerome's romantic fuck-up, or, more pleasing to the Belsey mentality, his flirtation with Christianity. How could he explain how pleasurable it had truly been to give himself up to the Kippses? It was a kind of blissful unselfing, a summer of un-Belsey. He had allowed the Kippses' world and their ways to take him over entirely. He had liked to listen to the exotic, to a Belsey, chatter of business and money and practical politics, to hear that equality was a myth and multiculturalism a fatuous dream. He thrilled at the suggestion that art was a gift from God, blessing only a handful of masters, and most literature merely a veil for poorly reasoned left-wing ideologies. He had put up a weak show of fighting these ideas, but only so that he might enjoy all the more the sensation of the family's ridicule, to hear once again how typically liberal, academic, and wishy-washy were his own thoughts. When Monty suggested that minority groups too often demand equal rights they haven't earned, Jerome had allowed this strange new idea to penetrate him without complaint and sunk further back into the receiving sofa. When Michael argued that being black was not an identity, but an accidental matter of pigment, Jerome had not given a traditionally hysterical Belsey answer, try telling that to the Klansman coming at you with a burning cross, but rather vowed to think less of his identity in the future. One by one, the gods of the Belseys toppled. I'm so full of liberal crap, Jerome had thought happily, bowed his head low and pressed his knees into one of the little red cushions provided for kneeling in the Kippses' pew of the local church. Long before Victoria arrived in the house, he was already in love. It was only that his general ardor for the family found its correct specific vessel in Victoria, right age, right gender, and as beautiful as the idea of God. Victoria herself, flush with the social and sexual successes of her first summer abroad without her family, returned home to find a tolerable young man, weighed down by his virginity and satisfyingly unmanned by his desire for her. It seemed petty not to make a gift of her newfound loveliness. She had been what Caribbeans call a Margar child, to a boy so obviously starved of the same quality. And he'd be gone by August anyway. They spent a week stealing kisses in shaded corners of the house and made love once, extremely badly, under the tree in the Kippses' back garden. Victoria never for a moment considered, but of course, Jerome did. Considering things too much all the time was the definition of who he was. "It's not healthy, baby," said his mother now, smoothing his hair to his scalp, watching it spring back. "You're brooding the hell out of this summer. Summer's almost up. What's your point?" said Jerome with uncharacteristic rudeness. "It's a shame, that's all," said Kiki quietly. "Look, Shug, I'm going to the festival. Why don't you come?" "Why don't I?" replied Jerome without inflection. "It's 110 degrees in here, baby. Everybody done gone already." Jerome mimed a minstrel's expression to match his mother's intonations. He returned to his task. As he wrote, his womanly mouth drew into a tight, cushioned pout, and this in turn accentuated the family's cheekbones, his prominent forehead, the detail that made him so unpretty, pulled forward as if in sympathy with the long horse's lashes that curled up to meet it. "You just gonna sit in all day, write your diary?" "Not a diary, journal." Kiki made a noise of defeat, stood up. She walked casually around the back of him and then belly flopped suddenly towards him, hugging him from behind, reading over his shoulder. "It is easy to mistake a woman for philosophy." "Mom, fuck off. I'm serious." "Watch your mouth. The mistake is to be attached to the world at all. It will not thank you for your attachments. Love is the extremely difficult realization." Jerome wrestled the book away from her. "What is that? Proverbs? Sounds heavy. You're not gonna put on a trench coat and shoot up your school now, are you, baby?" Ha ha. Kiki kissed the back of his head and stood up. "Too much recording. Try living," she suggested softly. False opposition. "Oh, Jerome, please. Get up out of that nasty thing. Come with me. You live in that goddamn beanbag. Don't make me go alone. Zora went with her girls already. I'm busy. Where's Levi? Saturday job. Come on, I'm by myself. And Howard left me high and dry, and he went off with Erskine an hour ago." This sneaky mention of his father's negligence had exactly the effect his mother had intended. He groaned and closed the book between his big, soft hands. Kiki reached out her own hands in a cross towards her son. He grabbed both and heaved himself up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So the 2007 winner was Half of a Yellow Sun by the novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. The judging panel then was chaired by the writer and broadcaster Muriel Gray. Muriel.
Thank you very much. I have to excuse my voice. I'm afraid I've lost my voice completely, so I'll croak my way through this. This was exactly as Martha said. It's always a really, sometimes heart-elevating and heart-sinking job being the chair of this prize. It's such an amazing thing. But when you come across something where you say it's a war novel, your heart obviously sinks. You think, well, I'm going to be lectured to for the next how many thousands of pages. And the most astonishing thing about this book that won that year in 2007 was there was no lecture whatsoever. This Half of a Yellow Sun was up against some very fierce competition that year, including Kieran Desai's book that won the Booker already. And yet this shone through so clearly and so wonderfully from the very, very first page. When you say anything's about a war, this particular book is about one of the worst genocides in human history. It was the Biafran War between 1967 and 70 when Biafra declared secession from Nigeria, and starvation was used probably for the first time in modern history as a weapon of war. And anyone who's of our generation remembers seeing those pictures on television or baffled by them, thinking it was a natural disaster, whereas this book explains so brilliantly and wonderfully and chronicles it perfectly exactly what lay behind that. And the most important thing is to say these are not characters set against the war. There's no setting against anything. There's no proscenium arch where there's a massive, great big event behind actors acting out as protagonists at the front. They are of the book. They are as one. The nuance of the part that they play of being in that war and being part of it and explaining its history is quite magnificent, and the maturity of the handling of the prose is exquisite. It really bases itself around 5 characters, a houseboy of an academic, a lecturer, 2 very middle class, upper middle class, very privileged women, and an outsider, a white Englishman who's an art researcher working there who falls in love with one of the sisters. And through their very beautifully nuanced journey, where their frailties and their mistakes are all wrapped up with the joy and humour that they also bring to it, we see an absolutely perfect picture of the tribal hatred, the ridiculous political clashes, the class wars indeed, that really plagued Nigeria, that led to this human tragedy. And it was an unbelievable thing to realise that the author of this book wrote this and won the prize when she was only 30 years old. Both her grandfathers died in the war, and even though she was so young, she felt she really had to chronicle it. And it has, I think, never been so beautifully chronicled, something so unpleasant in a way that makes you wish it never to end. I read this in 2 complete sittings, only having a break, I think, about 5 hours to sleep, because I simply couldn't put it down. It is more than a worthy winner. It is a piece of important history and perfect fiction, and should really be a benchmark for how to write something about something so beautiful, about something so dreadful. Half of a Yellow Sun.
Thank you very much, Muriel. And now to read from Half of a Yellow Sun, please welcome Sia Kiwa. Sia.
This is the point in the novel when the horrific Biafran War takes hold and Richard, a British writer, understands the immediate danger of the situation for Alana. Alana was sitting on Mohammed's veranda, drinking chilled rice milk, laughing at the delicious cold trickle down her throat, at the stickiness on her lips, when the gateman appeared and asked to speak to Mohammed. Mohammed left and came back moments later, holding what looked like a pamphlet. "They're rioting," he said. "It's the students, isn't it?" Alana asked. "I think it's religious. You must leave right away." His eyes avoided hers. "Mohammed, calm down. Souley said they are blocking the roads and searching for infidels. Come." He was already heading indoors. Alana followed. He worried too much, did Mohammed. Muslim students were always demonstrating about one thing or the other after all, and harassing people who were Western dressed. But they always dispersed quickly enough. Mohammed went to a room and came out with a long scarf. "Wear this so you can blend in," he said. Alana placed it over her head and wound it round her neck. "I look like a proper Muslim woman," she joked, but Mohammed barely smiled. "Let's go. I know a shortcut to the train station." "Train station? Arize and I are not leaving until tomorrow, Mohammed," Alana said. She almost ran to keep up with him. "I'm going back to my uncle's house in Sabongari." "Alana," Mohammed started the car. It jerked as he took off. "Sabongari is not safe." "What do you mean?" She tugged at the scarf. The embroidery at the edges felt coarse and uncomfortable against her neck. "Souley said they are well organized." Alana stared at him, suddenly frightened at how frightened he looked. "Mohammed?" His voice was low. He said Igbo bodies are lying on Airport Road. Alana realized then that this was not just another demonstration by religious students. Fear parched her throat. She clasped her hands together. "Please let us pick up my people first," she said. "Please." Mohammed headed towards Sabongari. A bus drove past, dusty and yellow. It looked like one of those campaign buses that politicians use to tour rural areas and give out rice and cash to villagers. A man was hanging out of the door, a loudspeaker pressed to his mouth. His slow Hausa words resonating. "The Igbo must go. The infidels must go. The Igbos must go." Mohammed reached out and squeezed her hand and held onto it as they drove past a crowd of young men on the roadside chanting, "Araba, Araba." He slowed down and blew the horn a few times in solidarity. They waved and he picked up speed again. In Sabongari, the first street was empty. Alana saw the smoke rising like tall grey shadows before she smelt the scent of burning. "Stay here," Mohammed said. As he stopped the car outside Uncle Mbezi's compound, she watched him run out. The street looked strange, unfamiliar. The compound gate was broken, the metal flattened on the ground. Then she noticed Auntie Ifeka's kiosk, or what remained of it, splinters of wood, packets of groundnuts lying in the dust. She opened the car door and climbed out. She paused for a moment because of how glaringly bright and hot it was. With flames billowing from the root, with grit and ash floating in the air, she began to run towards the house. She stopped when she saw the bodies. Uncle Mbezi lay face down in an ungainly twist, legs splayed. Something creamy white oozed through the large gash on the back of his head. Auntie Ifeka lay on the veranda. The cuts on her naked body were smaller, dotting her arms and legs like slightly parted red lips. Alana felt a watery queasiness in her bowels before the numbness spread over her and stopped at her feet. Mohammed was dragging her, pulling her, his grasp hurting her arm, but she could not leave without Arize. Arize was due at any time. Arize needed to be close to a doctor. Arize, she said. Arize is down the road. The smoke was thickening around her, so that she was not sure if the crowd of men drifting into the yard were real or just plumes of smoke, until she saw the shiny metal blades of their axes and machetes and blood-stained kaftans that flapped around their legs. Mohammed pushed her into the car and then went around and got in. "Keep your face down," he said. "We finished the whole family. It was Allah's will," one of the men called out in Hausa. The man was familiar. It was Abdul Malik. He nudged a body on the ground with his foot, and Alana noticed then how many bodies were lying there, like dolls made of cloth. "Who are you?" another said, standing in front of the car. Mohammed opened his door, the car still on, and spoke in rapid, coaxing Hausa. The man stood aside. Alana turned to look closely to see if it really was Abdul Malik. "Don't raise your face," Mohammed said. He narrowly missed a cooker tree. One of the large pods had fallen down, and Alana heard the crunching squash as the car ran over it. She lowered her head. It was Abdul Malik. He had nudged another body, a woman's headless body, and stepped over it, placed one leg down and then the other, although there was enough room to step to the side. "Allah does not allow this," Mohammed said. He was shaking, his entire body was shaking. "Allah will not forgive them. Allah will not forgive the people who have made them do this. Allah will never forgive this." They drove in a frenzied silence, past the policemen in blood-splattered uniforms, past vultures perched on the roadside, past boys carrying looted radios, until he parked at the train station and shoved her onto a crowded train.
Thank you very much, Sia. Thank you. So the 2008 panel was chaired by broadcaster and journalist Kirsty Lang, and they chose the novel The Road Home by Rose Tremaine. Kirsty.
Images of Syrians fleeing the conflict in their country means that migration is a topic that's very much in our minds at the moment. And in The Road Home, what Rose Tremaine does so... Well, I'm about to tip this over. What Rose Tremaine does so brilliantly is ask the question, what happens to somebody who arrives in this country alone, with almost no money? What does Britain, London in particular, look like through their eyes? Her protagonist, Lev, arrives here by coach after a sort of 2 or 3 day journey. We don't know exactly where he's come from. It's somewhere in Eastern Europe. It could be Russia or Poland. And he's got nothing but a handful of 20 quid bills in his pocket. He's been told by his friend back home that you can live on 20 quid a week in London. By lunchtime, he's figured out that's not true. He is an economic migrant. He used to work in a sawmill back home, but it closed down because they'd cut down all the trees. He's left behind a young daughter. He's widowed. His wife died of cancer in his early 30s. So he's vulnerable already. He's a bit lost, and he's carrying all this with him. Now, this material in a novelist less skilled than Rose Tremaine could be a bit bleak, a bit depressing, but it isn't, actually. She manages to use the canvas of contemporary London as a backdrop for Lev's, I'd say, picaresque adventures in a way that is both moving and funny. And ultimately, this is a very uplifting book. Now, for the first few days, Lev sleeps rough. He delivers flyers for Ahmed, who sells kebabs on the Earls Court Road and is having rather a hard time post 9/11 because people don't want to frequent Muslim businesses. So we learn a lot about the lives of other migrants. It's a whole, other world. But things start to look up for Lev after he finds a room in a house owned by yet another migrant, an Irishman in this case, and then he gets a job in a trendy restaurant. And this is where Rose Tremaine does a really clever thing, because she switches the novel then. It becomes from tragic to comic, and writes some wonderful vignettes about this celebrity chef who runs the restaurant, and his clients, who include sort of a pretentious young playwright, a ridiculous hat designer, and a young British artist whose work sell for hundreds of thousands of pounds. And we're seeing all of this through Lev's eyes, and he's a wonderful character, a warm, gentle man who's struggling with homesickness while desperately trying to fit in here in London and make a new life for himself. It is a truly great and very moving book.
Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you very much. Please welcome Prasanna Pawanaraja to read from The Road Home.
G.K. Ash wasn't the way Lev had imagined him. He was a wiry man, not tall, with wild black hair he stuffed inside a cotton hat and eyes of a startling blue. Lev put his age at about 35. He came into the kitchen just before 4 and found Lev ready at his sinks with his striped apron on. "Okay," he said, shaking Lev's hand. "I'm G.K. Ash. Glad you're joining us, sir. Oh, Lev." "I'm glad also, sir," said Lev. "Don't call me sir, call me chef." "Chef. Damien told you I run a tight ship." "Tight ship?" "The difference between a kitchen where some people are lazy and careless and one where everybody's tasking at maximum stretch is the difference between a successful enterprise and a failed one. And the word failure pisses me off. I don't want even to contemplate it, right? Everybody in this space has to cut the mustard." "Mustard, chef?" G.K. Ash moved past Lev towards the sinks. "Now, this station, treat it like an operating theatre. I want all the stuff, every spoon, every tin, every colander, every bowl, every crusher, chopper, stoner, grater, every last potato peeler, sterile clean. When you've scrubbed up the roasting pan, I want to be able to drink a cocktail out of it, okay?" "Cocktail, chef?" "Yes, the hygiene in some kitchens is bloody pitiful. 70% of cases of food poisoning in this country begin in restaurant kitchens, but not in mine, not in mine. So see to it, right?" G.K. put his hand on Lev's shoulder. "Nurse is going to be your nickname," he said. "That's what I call my KPs, Nurse. And you have to live up to your name." "Nurse? Yep. Don't take it as an insult. Quite the contrary. It's a designation. Just do your work with pride and you'll be okay." "I will try," said Lev. G.K. smiled. He pirouetted away from Lev, turned to say, "New menu begins this evening, so it may get a bit hot in here. There may be a fair bit of replating going on, but what do nurses do? They stay calm. They clear up the mess. You got it? We're counting on you, Lev." More staff began to arrive. They came over and introduced themselves to Lev. Lev tried to remember their names: Tony and Pierre, sous chefs; Waldo, patisserie and pudding chef; Sophie, vegetable and salad preparation; and the waiters, Stuart, Jeb, Mario. All were younger than Lev, and they seemed solemn, as actors seem when they're nervous. At 5, the group sat down at a table at the back of the restaurant, and Jeb served poached chicken legs with celery, carrots, and gnocchi, cooked by Tony. Lev ate very slowly. There was some cleansing herb in the gnocchi that he wanted to identify. He savoured the delicious potato ball, rolled it round in his mouth. Parsley. That was it. He ate it silently, wondering how it was made, while all around him the dishes for the new menu were being discussed and final notes scribbled by the chefs. Plating up the trout terrine, he heard G.K. Ash say, "I want the leaves in a rosette shape and clear of the slice. I don't want them touching the fish, playing all over the plate like some stupid paper chase. Barely dressed, okay? Just a glisten of vinaigrette. And the grapefruit mayonnaise should look like an army button on the cuff of the terrine. You see the image?" "Yes, chef," said Pierre. "And keep it small," G.K. went on. "The trout's moist enough, rich enough. What we're saying with this mayo is, okay, we're going to spoil you now, but not too much. You have to savour it. Don't overcook it then. I don't want to see my lovely halibut sitting on bogey slime." There was a clatter of laughter. Sophie said, "You're putting me off my grub, chef." "Good," said G.K. "You're too fat as it is." The group went silent. Lev looked up and saw Sophie blush, lay down her knife and fork on her half-finished meal. And he remembered Laura once saying, "In a workplace, as a woman in this country, you're fighting a war every day." He looked away from Sophie as Stuart and Mario cleared away the chicken plates, and Waldo brought a dish of creme brulee, its crust still bubbling from his blowtorch. "Chef," said Waldo, "I want everyone to try this. I'm using blueberries just cooked for 1 minute to soften their shape as a nice astringent base to the cream." "Okay," said GK, "give us a spoon." He turned to Lev. "You taste this too," he said. "We call desserts puddings in England. Hangover from the days where that's what desserts were, steamed puddings. It's probably why Queen Victoria was the shape she was. But in Britain now, a pudding can be a mint sorbet, it can be a poached lychee in a spun sugar basket. You get it, Olev." "Pudding," said Lev. "Yes, I know English pudding." "Sure," said GK, lightly investigating the brulee crust with the edge of his spoon. "But now you can know it properly, know it for what it means. If you're coming to work in a kitchen, Olev, you have to get the words right. You have to get the glossary into your head." "I will, chef," said Lev, and he wanted to add, as politely as he could, that there was one word GK Ash himself could get into his head, and that word was Lev. But when he opened his mouth to speak, GK had turned away, and everybody was concentrating on Waldo's brulee. Now, Lev's arms were deep in his sinks. Round his head, GK Ash had tied a clean white cotton bandana. He'd done this almost tenderly, tucking Lev's springy hair underneath it. "Nurse's hat," he said. "Keep it tight, okay, Lev? Don't want human DNA in the dishwasher." Lev worked, trying to keep pace with the rising tumult as at the chef's station. The hot water, the grandeur of the steel surfaces, the fierceness of the rinse faucet made him forget that this was a lowly job. Steam clothed the tiles. On his right-hand surface, the chefs hurled down mixing bowls, strainers, knives, stock pans, whisks, and chopping boards, and Lev's hands took them up and immersed them. He'd been nicknamed Nurse, so now, in his imagination, he became a nurse to these objects. He told himself to examine each pan, each utensil in a clinical way, to coax the dirt out of it, to keep watch, moment to moment, over its arduous alteration. By 11, Lev could feel the movement in the kitchen slowing, and the objects that arrived by his sinks were different. Baking trays, sorbet glasses, ramekins, egg beaters, pastry cutters, spoons, coffee cups, and cafetières. He allowed himself to turn once to see what everybody was doing, and he saw Sophie close the vegetable chiller and begin to take off her kitchen whites. When she removed the little cotton hat she'd been wearing, her hair was damp and lying in heavy curls close to her skull, as though she'd been swimming. "Night, everybody," she said. GK Ash came over to her, put a hand on her wet head and considered her with her ice-blue eyes. "Nice calm work, Sophie," he said. "Everything well coordinated. Pretty good." "Thank you, chef," said Sophie. The other chefs raised a hand to her, and then she turned to Lev. "Night, Lev," she said. Lev felt himself execute a ridiculous little bow while holding in his hands a bowl and a whisk. Waldo and Jeb sniggered. Sophie smiled. Lev said quietly, "Sophie, I'm sorry, my name is Lev, not Olev." "Oh, right," said Sophie, "I'm sorry too." "Nothing to be sorry about," said GK Ash. "His name's Nurse." By 1 o'clock, when the service was long over and the front of house empty of the last customers and the dining room dark and silent, the staff had gone home, and the only people who stayed behind in the kitchen were Lev and GK Ash. Ash sat on a stool at his workstation and drank white wine and made notes on his menu pads. His blue eyes darted everywhere, observing Lev as he cleaned the hobs and the salamanders, the plate warmers and the steel countertops. Lev was then reminded to sweep and mop the floor. "I sacked the last nurse," said GK, as Lev poured hot water and floor cleaner into the red bucket. "Because he refused to do this late-night stuff properly. I said to him, you're an idiot. Idiots sleep while the smart guys work." But he didn't get it, so tough. He was history. Lucky for you. "Yes," said Lev. "Lucky for me, chef." But he felt as tired as an old mule. His yearning for a cigarette made him shivery. His hands were sore and burning, and the ache in his back was like a wound. He longed to lay down his head on the surprised faces of the wandering giraffes.
That was almost as if it was planned, you know, Kirsty talking about the wonder about it actually there being funny bits, and then there it came. Fantastic, we almost rehearsed this. In 2009, the judges were chaired by Fee Glover, and they chose the novel Home by the American writer Marilynne Robinson. And Marilynne, just in case any of you are going to do University Challenge in the future and any questions about the Women's Prize for Fiction comes up, you might like to know that to date, Marilynne is the oldest winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction. Anyway, Fee.
Now, we had the most superbly talented table of judges back in 2009. The writer Badisha, Kira Cochrane, Sarah Churchwell, Baroness Lane Fox of Soho. We were allowed to call her Martha way back then. And in amongst the hundreds of books that we read, Marilynne Robinson's Home simply shone. I held it up to be talked about at our first meeting, and it sailed through to the long list. I held it up again at the shortlist meeting, and it sailed through that one too. And the speed of its nomination was because of the quality of the writing in Home. Now, the arc of the story, the settings, the characters, they're things that you can read about elsewhere. Set in Iowa in the 1950s, Home is about a family whose children are grown up and flown the nest, but now return for their various reasons to nurse the wounds of adult life in what they hope is a place of healing and comfort. There's a father reaching the end of his life, a backdrop of religion, and it's a book about that gap between expectation and reality, and that's a place that great novelists often live. It's all set in the fictional town of Gilead, and it's about the return of brother and sister Jack and Glory going back to their father's house. Now, Jack has had a battle with the booze, and Glory has had a tragic affair, a relationship she thought would lead to marriage, but it hasn't. And really, it's a book about family dynamics. The Borton family is a Presbyterian one. Jack and Glory's father is a minister in that church, and it's a patriarchal story about what you hope for your children and what your children hope from you. And it's ultimately about love and also those constant warriors of life, hope and disappointment. And I think it's also about how it's not always within your power to change your own destiny. Now, in a world where one of the more irritating contemporary beliefs is that every negative can be turned into a positive, this is about, don't you hate it? This is about lives that, and here's a spoiler alert now, might not be transformed. So Jack and Glory are living lives that we all recognize. They could be our lives, and just like the rest of us, perhaps apart from Peter Andre, who seems to be able to rise from the ashes no matter what, but for the rest of us, life knocks away a tiny bit. So to Robinson's gift, which is her prose, I bet you didn't think you'd hear a Peter Andre mentioned tonight. Get in! From the moment that we started reading the book, I think that all of us had that fabulous feeling you have when you begin a book that's beautifully written. You simply go, I'm in safe hands now. And Robinson's hands are not just safe, they're immensely wise. So what Home does is it tells you a story that you already know, but it sharpens that focus. And Glory, who I should warn you spends most of the book in tears, has rested her hopes on a man knowing that he was weak and insincere, but she's ignored her own doubt in the hope that the marriage would bring children and a home that she would like too. And Jack, of course, is frustrated by his own character. Those who he meets and loves think of him as good and kind, but he can't find that within himself. He's often found it in a bottle, and he also has a secret, and that's a secret which doesn't really emerge until the end of the book. Now, the end of this book is really important, and I suspect that it means different things to every single person who reads it. When we talked about it around the judges' table, I think we all felt, though, that it's about whatever the follies of your own life, especially the ones that you can't solve. Home offers you something, and maybe that's painful in your generation, but it might actually survive for the next. So it's a book that might mean something different to you. We all thought that it would mean something to you, and that's why we chose it. Now, the writer and journalist Brian Appleyard puts it way better when he was reviewing the book than I ever could, and I do think it's good to know what men think of these great, great female writers. And he wrote, "I'm not saying that you're actually dead if you haven't read Marilynne Robinson, but I honestly couldn't say that you're fully alive. So I would say, don't let Brian down. Don't be a dead person. Read the book." Thank you.
Oh, dear. Thank you so much, Fee. Please now welcome to read from Home, Sheila Hancock, who is also, of course, an acclaimed best-selling #1 novelist herself. Sheila. Right, at this point of the novel, Jack, the prodigal son of the Boughton family, returns home, where his sister Glory and father have been waiting. What followed were weeks of trouble and disruption, dealing with the old man's anticipation and anxiety, and then his disappointment, every one of which made him restless and sleepless and cross. She spent the days coaxing her father to eat. The refrigerator and the pantry were stocked with everything he thought he remembered Jack's having a liking for, and he suspected Glory of wanting to give up too soon and eat it all on the pretext of avoiding waste. So he would accept nothing but a bowl of oatmeal or a poached egg, while skin thickened on cream pies and lettuce went limp. She had worried about what to do with it all if Jack never came. The thought of sitting down to a stale, humiliated feast with her heartbroken father was intolerable. But she had thought it anyway to remind herself how angry she was, and with what justification. She had, in fact, planned to smuggle food out of the house by night in amounts the neighbours' dogs could eat, since it would be too old to offer to the neighbours themselves, and they would no doubt feed it to the dogs anyway, tainted as it was with bitterness and grief. Glory had rehearsed angry outbursts in anticipation of his arrival. "Who do you think you are? And how can you be so inconsiderate?" Which became, as the days passed, "How can you be so mean, cruel, vicious?" and so on. She began to hope he would come so she could tell him exactly what she thought. Well, of course she was angry, with those loaves of banana bread ripening noisomely in the pantry. "What right do you have?" she stormed inwardly, knowing as she did that her father's only prayers were that Jack would come and that Jack would stay. "He says here for a while. A while can be a significant amount of time." They had Jack's address after the great letter came, the one that made her father weep and tremble. Her father sent another note and a little check in case the first had gone astray, and they waited. Jack's letter lay open on the breakfast table and the supper table and the lamp table and the arms of the Morris chair. He had folded it away once when Reverend Ames came for checkers, presumably because he did not want a doubtful glance to fall on it. "Yes, he will definitely be coming," he would conclude, as if uncertainty on that point had to do with the language of the letter. 2 weeks passed, then 3 days. Then came the telephone call, and her father actually spoke with Jack, actually heard his voice. "He says he'll be here day after tomorrow." Her father's anxiety turned to misery without ever losing the quality of patience. "I believe it could only be trouble of a serious kind that would account for this delay," he said, comforting himself by terrifying himself. Another week, then the second telephone call, again with the information that he would arrive in 2 days. Then 4 days passed, and there he was, standing in the back porch, a thin man in a brown suit, tapping his hat against his pant leg as if he could not make up his mind whether to knock on the glass or turn the knob or simply to leave again. He was watching her as if suddenly reminded of an irritant or an obstacle, watching her with the kind of directness that forgets to conceal itself. She was a problem he had not taken into account. "He did not expect to see me here," she thought. "He is not happy to see me." She opened the door. "Jack," she said, "I was about to give up on you. Come in." She wondered if she would have recognized him if she'd passed him on the street. He was pale and unshaven, and there was a nick of scar under his eye. "Well, here I am," he shrugged. "Shall I come in?" He seemed to be asking her advice as well as her permission. "Yeah, of course. You can't imagine how he has worried." "Is he here?" "Where else would he be?" "He's here. He's sleeping." "I'm sorry I'm late. I tried to make a phone call and the bus left without me." "You should have called Papa." He looked at her. "The phone was in a bar," he said.
He was quiet, matter of fact. I would have cleaned up a little, but I lost the bag that had my razor in it. He touched the stubble on his jaw with a kind of concern, as if it were an abrasion. He had always been fastidious about such things. No matter, you can use Papa's razor. Sit down, I'll get you some coffee. Thank you, he said. I don't want to put you to any trouble. She didn't say it was late for him to start worrying about that. He was distant and respectful and tentative. In this, at least, he was so much like the brother of her memory that she knew one hard look from her might send him away, defeating all her prayers, not to mention her father's prayers, which were unceasing. If he came and left again while her father was sleeping, would she ever tell the old man he had come and gone? Would she tell him it was her anger that had driven him away, this thin, weary, unkempt man who had been reluctant even to step through the door? And he had come to the kitchen door, a custom of the family from their childhood, waiting for them. He must have done it unreflectingly, obedient to old habit, like a ghost, she thought. It's no trouble, she said. I'm just glad you're here. Thank you, Glory. That's good to know. He hesitated over her name, maybe because he was not absolutely certain which sister he was dealing with. Maybe because he did not want to seem too familiar. Maybe because familiarity required an effort. She started putting water in the percolator, but he said, I'm sorry about this. Could I lie down for a little while? He put his hand to his face. That gesture, she thought. This shouldn't have happened. I've been all right for a long time. Sure, you go rest. I'll get an aspirin, she said. It seems like old times, sneaking you upstairs with a bottle of aspirin. She had meant this as a joke of sorts, but he gave her a startled look and she was sorry she had said it. Then they heard bed springs and their father calling, Do we have company? Glory, I believe we do. Yes. And then the slippered feet and the cane. Jack stood up and brushed his hair off his brow and shook his cuffs and waited. And then the old man appeared in the door. Ah, here you are. I knew you would come, yes. She could see her father's surprise and regret. His eyes brimmed. 20 years is a very long time. Jack offered his hand and said, Sir? And his father said, Yeah, shaking hands is very good, but I'll put down this cane there, he said, when he hooked it on the table's edge. Now, he said, and he embraced his son. Here you are. He put the flat of his hand on Jack's lapel caressingly. We have worried so much, and here you are. Jack put his arms around his father's shoulders carefully, as if he were frightened by the old man's smallness and frailty, or embarrassed by it. His father stepped back and looked at him again. He wiped his eyes. Isn't it something? He said. Here I've been wearing a necktie for days, waking and sleeping, as Glory will tell you, and you've got me in my nightshirt. And what is it? Almost noon. Ah, he said, and laid his head against Jack's lapel for a moment. Then he said, Glory will help me out a little. I'll get my shoes on and comb my hair, and pretty soon I'll be something you can recognize. But I knew I heard your voice, and I couldn't wait to get a look at you. Yes, he said, and took his cane and started toward the hallway. Glory, if you could help me a little after you put the coffee on. And he set off towards his room. Jack said, after all these years, I guess he still knows when I'm hungover.
Thank you, Sheila. In 2010, the chair of the judging panel was novelist and television producer Davy. There are no gentlemen here. Well, there are two gentlemen there. Daisy Goodwin, ladies and gentlemen. This is terrific. And Daisy's panel chose The Lacuna by Barbara Kingsolver. Daisy.
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, just call me Dave. You know, yeah. Yeah, my Apple Watch just told me it's time to stand up, so I'm glad I've got a chance to stretch my legs. This is, when I was judging the prize, I had to read 132 novels, I think, and I was writing my first novel at the time, so it was the best creative writing course you can imagine, and I divided books into the ones that I was quite pleased I hadn't, well, I felt that I could do possibly better than, and the ones who I knew that I could never, ever, possibly in a million years emulate. And it's a tribute to Barbara Kingsolver's incredible storytelling skill that at 700 pages, she was always at the top of my pile. And this is a book that I'm really jealous that I didn't write, or I would never have the skill to have written. And it's an extraordinary book. It's called The Lacuna, which is possibly a slightly off-putting title, but actually when you read it, it makes total sense. A lacuna means what's missing. It means a gap. And this whole book is about what's missing, what isn't said, what has to be discovered. And what I love about the book is that it makes the reader work a little bit about what's actually going on there. And I like a book where you have to kind of apply a little mental energy. And it's the story of Harrison Shepherd, who is, he's the son of a Mexican mother and an American father. The father is missing. Missing is a word that recurs throughout the book. And the mother is a kind of adventuress. And he grows up under the care of a Mexican cook who basically teaches him everything he knows in Mexico. And in the middle of the book, it's all set in the sort of 20th century, the mid-20th century. He's living in Mexico City, and he finds himself part of this extraordinary erotic love triangle between Trotsky, Frida Kahlo, the wonderful artist, and her husband, Diego Rivera, the fantastic Mexican muralist. And that's terribly sexy and involving and extraordinary. And then in the second half of the book, he finds himself in America. He moves to America, and he becomes the author of an extraordinary series of best-selling novels about the Aztecs. And those bring him to the attention, because they've got a sort of a socialist subtext, the attention of Senator McCarthy and the House of Un-American Activities Committee. So he's right at the nexus of mid-century politics. And after his sort of public shaming by the HUAC committee, he disappears and is presumed dead. But as people who've read the book will know, is he really dead, or is he just missing? And that's what's so brilliant about it. It's a very ambiguous book, and it leaves lots of questions that you can't answer at the end. The passage that you're about to hear is when Harrison Shepherd is in Mexico, and he's going to find something, you know, he wants to find a job, and he finds himself walking into the studio of the painter, who is Diego Rivera, who's preparing one of his incredible murals. And I don't know if anybody's ever done a mural, but a mural is fantastic physical work. And because Harrison has grown up in this kitchen, he knows all about dough and kneading and mixing things. He finds himself uniquely qualified to help the painter in his work.
Thank you, Daisy. Stanley, the floor is yours again.
This is an extract from the diary of Harrison Shepherd as he encounters the famed muralist Diego Rivera for the first time. October 25th. Today the painter came to work. He was already on the scaffolds at 9 o'clock, high up on the planks, hard to see, but plainly he was there because workers swarmed around him like his own hive of bees. The assistant boys were running all over the courtyard with water and plaster, planks and ladders. They mixed plaster in buckets and haul it up to him on a rope. It's not just a painting, these boys explained with proper scorn. A mural. Hard to say that in English. A wall made. Not wall or painting, but both combined. Made at the same time, so the picture will never fall off unless the wall itself tumbles. A plaster captain up on the scaffold works continuously at the painter's side, spreading the last thin coat of white paste, not too quickly or too slow, so the painter can put his pigments in the plaster as it dries. Those two have worked together since God was sucking his mother's tit, the boys said. They seemed more afraid of the plaster captain than the painter, though both men shouted down like God, sending commandments. Too much water in the plaster, or not enough. Today, every boy was stupid. The problem was the man in charge of plaster mixing, named Santiago, but today named Mud because he was absent. They say he broke his head in a fight over a woman, and according to the painter, without Santiago, none of these boys could mix plaster any better than his grandmother's dog. I can mix plaster. Go ahead then. It was like mixing the flour for pan dulce. How could it be so different? The powder they called cal has the same fine grind, floating up in white clouds around the boys when they dumped bags of it into the mixing buckets. Their eyelashes and the backs of their hands were white, and the edges of their nostrils from breathing it. They were dumping powder into the water, not the other way around. Wait, spread a canvas on the floor, make a mountain of the powder, pour water in the center, a lake in the volcano. Mix the lagoons with your fingers into marshes, making the paste thick, gradually, or there will be lumps. Even the old plaster captain up on the platform stopped working to watch. It was terrifying. Where did you learn that? It's like making dough for pan dulce. That caused the plaster boys to laugh. Boys don't make bread. But they were in trouble, so they got quiet again. One asked, like nixtamal for tortillas? No. The white flour dough, you use it for European bread and sweet buns. Ha ha ha, sweet buns. So, the new job has a new name to go with it. But the plaster captain and painter both remarked on the plaster. The plaster captain is Senor Alva, the painter is Senor Rivera. He is even more fat than he looked in the newspaper and feared by the boys, so it might be true he eats flesh. But when he climbed down from the scaffold to go make his water, he said, "Hey, sweet buns, come over here. Let me have a look at the boy who's mixing this good plaster." He said, "Come back tomorrow. We may need you again." October 29th. The painter keeps boys running as late as the last trolley run. Sometimes you mix or tie ropes or carry things up the scaffolds. The Palacio has spiked iron lanterns hanging from the ceiling. You have to watch your head or you could crown yourself. The stairwell mural is the size of 2 walls, one above the other. It is meant to be finished before the end of the year. A coarse plaster full of sand goes on first to cover ridges and bumps in the brick wall. Next, 3 more layers, each smoother and whiter, more marble dust and less sand. The bumps are erased like forgetting, and the painter begins the story new. Each day he leaves more history on the wall, and boys leave with more pesos in their pockets. Today, Senor Alva came down from the scaffold as fast as a monkey to fight with one of the guards. They're rude about the paintings. 4 boys in Tejano hats came in and they said they would throw tar on the wall after the painter goes home to defend Mexico and save her national symbols from insult. Senor Alva shouted at the guards to keep those boys away, but the painter seems not to care what they say. He keeps painting. November 10th. Senor Rivera is gone. And the wall only half painted. Indians and horsemen ride above white air. The mountains have no ground beneath them. The coal sketches on the rough white wall remain half alive, waiting. This can't be the end, but Senor Alva says for sure he's gone. To San Francisco, to paint for the gringos. The only work now is to take apart the scaffold and clean the splatters of plaster off the floor. That's it, boys, he says. The pesos have gone to San Francisco, too.
Thank you, Stanley. In 2011, the chair of the panel was the historian and classicist Bettany Hughes, and they chose a debut novel by Thea Obrecht, The Tiger's Wife. I was going to give you the University Challenge thing about Thea being the youngest ever winner to date of the Women's Prize, but thanks to Fee's intervention, you will all need to know that when the question is asked, what is the connection between the Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction and Peter Andre, you will say it is Fee Glover. So I'm afraid to say that Bettany, at the last minute, isn't able to be here this evening, but I'm delighted to say that the legendary publisher, Liz Calder, is going to step in. And another tiny bit of University Challenge stuff for you is that Liz was the publisher, the editor of the 2nd ever winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction, right back at the beginning, and that novel was Anne Michael's Fugitive Pieces. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the stage, Liz.
Thank you very much, Kate. I'm delighted to be here. I'm only so sorry that Bettany couldn't be here. in my place, and I'm going to do my best to represent her words. However, being the superwoman that she is, she has sent us her notes about this magical novel. I was thinking of shamelessly passing them off as my own. However, on second thoughts and mature consideration, I decided to come clean. So I'll let you know when it's Bethany. Our decision came as a surprise to us, given that there were several passionate advocates of other titles. However, after lengthy discussions, it rose to the top like cream. And now we go to Bethany. Taya Obrecht was only 19 when she started to write The Tiger's Wife, a mind-blowing achievement. It is a story about the edges of war, somewhere in the Balkans, I think. We can assume it was the former Yugoslavia. The novel reminds us that the life and horror of a war is not all about the 30 seconds of news hit, not just bloody explosions and soldiers taking aim, but rather dentists turning to drink, orphan circus animals roaming the streets, the effects of bombing being some kind of terrible joke, having no clean pants, then no pants at all. There's a war on, so you can smoke and make out with boys that would be unglamorous in the cold light of peace. Told by Natalia, it crosses through time, her childhood, her teenage years, her life as a young woman, and the timeless space inside a story. We meet a deathless man, an abused, deaf-mute wife, who becomes the tiger's wife. A musical butcher and a skull-smuggling surgeon. We meet a boy who learns to love. We discover the dangers of allowing gossip, rumor, slander to take hold as ugly fact. I was going to go big on this, says Bethany in her notes. I think unfounded gossip is one of the great ills of society. The book reminds us not just to only connect, but of the fact that we are always connected, physiologically through genes and carbon, philosophically through being human, and through time, thanks to memories, stories, and history. The Tiger's Wife opens up that post-Byzantine, post-Ottoman world where Muslims, Christians, and Jews have rubbed along together for centuries. This book is great because it reminds us of the fundamental power of the mind and of love. It is wise, witty, wonderful. I couldn't have put it better myself.
And to read from The Tiger's Wife, please welcome back Sia. Sia.
This passage comes from the prologue at the beginning of Obrecht's magical book. In my earliest memory, my grandfather is bald as a stone, and he takes me to see the tigers. He puts on his hat, his big buttoned raincoat, and I wear my lacquered shoes and velvet dress. It is autumn, and I am 4 years old. The certainty of this process, my grandfather's hand, the bright hiss of the trolley, the dampness of the morning, the crowded walk up the hill to the Citadel Park. In my grandfather's breast pocket, the Jungle Book, with its gold leaf cover and old yellow pages. I am not allowed to hold it, but it will stay open on his knee all afternoon while he recites the passages to me. Even though my grandfather is not wearing his stethoscope or white coat, the lady at the counter in the entrance shed calls him doctor. Then there is the popcorn cart, the umbrella stand, a small kiosk with postcards and pictures. Down the stairs and past the aviary where the sharp-eared owls sleep, through the garden that runs the length of the Citadel wall, framed with cages. Once there was a king there, a sultan, his janissaries. Now the cannon windows facing the street hold blocked-off troughs filled with tepid water. The cage bars curve out, rusted orange. In his free hand, my grandfather is carrying the blue bag my grandma has prepared for us. In it, 6-day-old cabbage heads for the hippopotamus, carrots and celery for the sheep and deer, and the bull moose, who is a kind of phenomenon. In his pocket, my grandfather has hidden some sugar cubes for the pony that pulls the park carriage. I will not remember this as sentimentality, but as greatness. The tigers live in the outer moat of the fortress. We climb the castle stairs, past the water birds and the sweating windows of the monkey house, past the wolf growing his winter coat. We pass the bearded vultures and then the bears, asleep all day, smelling of damp earth and the death of something. My grandfather picks me up and props my feet against the handrail so I can look down and see the tigers in the moat. My grandfather never refers to the tiger's wife by name. His arm is around me and my feet are on the handrail. And my grandfather might say, I once knew a girl who loved tigers so much she almost became one herself. Because I am little and my love of tigers comes directly from him, I believe he is talking about me, offering me a fairy tale in which I can imagine myself, and will for years and years. The cages face a courtyard, and we go down the stairs and walk slowly from cage to cage. There is a panther too, ghost spots paling his oil-slick coat, a sleepy, bloated lion from Africa. But the tigers are awake and livid, bright with rancor. Striped-lashed shoulders rolling, they flank one another up and down the narrow causeway of rock, and the smell of them is sour and warm and fills everything. It will stay with me the whole day, even after I've had my bath and gone to bed, and will return at random times, at school, at a friend's birthday party, even years later at the pathology lab, or on the drive home from Galena. I remember this too, an altercation. A small group of people stand clustered around the tiger's cage. Among them, a boy with a parrot-shaped balloon, a woman in a purple coat, and a bearded man who's wearing the brown uniform of a zookeeper. The man has a broom and a long dustpan handle, and he's sweeping the area between the cage and the outer railing. He walks up and down, sweeping up juice boxes and candy wrappers, bits of popcorn people have tried to throw at the tigers. The tigers walk up and down with him. The woman in purple is saying something and smiling, and he smiles back at her. She has brown hair. The dustpan keeper stops and leans against the handle of his broom, and as he does so, the big tiger sweeps by, rubbing against the bars of the cage, rumbling. And the keeper puts a hand through the bars and touches its flank. For a moment, nothing, and then pandemonium. The tiger rounds on him and the woman shrieks, and suddenly the dustpan keeper's shoulder is between the bars and he's twisting his head away and trying to reach for the outer railing so that he has something to hold on to. The tiger has the dustpan keeper's arm the way a dog holds a large bone, upright between his claws, gnawing on the top. The two men who have been standing by with the children jump over the railing and grab the dustpan keeper's waist and flailing arm and try to pull him away. A third man jams his umbrella through the bars and pushes it over and over again into the tiger's ribs. An outraged scream from the tiger, and then it stands up on its hind legs and hugs the dustpan keeper's arm and shakes its head from side to side like it's pulling on rope. Its ears are flattened and it's making the noise like a locomotive. The dustpan keeper's face is white, and this entire time he hasn't made a sound. Then suddenly, it's no longer worth it, and the tiger lets go. The three men fall away, and there's a splatter of blood. The tiger is lashing its tail, and the dustpan keeper is crawling under the outer railing and standing up. The woman in purple has vanished. My grandfather has not turned away. I am 4 years old, but he's not turned me away either. I see it all, and later there is the fact that he wants me to have seen. The dustpan keeper is hurrying our way, winding a piece of torn shirt across his arm. He is red-faced and angry on his way to the infirmary. At the time, I believe this is fear. But later, I know this as embarrassment, as shame. The tigers, agitated, are lunging back and forth across the gate. The keeper is leaving a dark trail on the gravel behind him. As he passes us, my grandfather says, "My God, you're a fool, aren't you?" And the man says something and replies something I know not to repeat. Instead, shrill and self-righteous in my lacquered boots, brave because my grandfather is holding my hand, I say, "He's a fool, isn't he, Grandpa?" But my grandfather is already walking after the dustpan keeper, pulling me along, calling for the man to stop so he can help him.
Thank you. In 2012, the novelist Joanna Trollope was at the helm, and her panel chose another debut novel in the form of Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles. Joanna.
Now, I have to say, and I think I speak for probably all of us here, that judging this prize was the best fun any of us ever had judging a literary prize. It wasn't just spectacular judges. I had Victoria Derbyshire, Natasha Kaplinsky, Lisa Apollonesi, and Natalie Haynes. So it was the most wonderful panel. But we were beautifully looked after by Kate and Harriet and Amanda, and I have to say the sponsors, who were rather different in those days. But it really was the most wonderful affirmative thing, even before you got to the gorgeous books, and they really were gorgeous. And our year, the most gorgeous, was this debut novel, The Song of Achilles. Now, it's a historical novel, and of course, a first novel, though you'd hardly guess the latter from the standard of the writing. It's based actually on a story of Homer's, a story from the Iliad. And that story is a love story, a love that starts in boyhood and blossoms in manhood, between Achilles, the legendary hero of the Trojan War, and his companion, Patroclus. Now, Homer, in the original, doesn't actually spell out the nature of the relationship, but he simply describes events that make it perfectly plain. But when he describes how Achilles utterly refused to have Patroclus' body burned after his death, as was the custom, but kept it in his tent to kiss and weep over, it is far more eloquent in that form than explicit descriptions would have been. And Madeline Miller is equally subtle in dealing with this age-old story. And she's also very respectful of historic social customs, while at the same time confronting Achilles' personality as entirely human and consequently flawed. After all, his main motivation for fighting in the Great War was because he was hungry for the fame accorded to mighty warriors in the ancient world. And it isn't just the unadmirable in her hero that she has to tackle. She has to find a voice for this novel, a way of telling this story that gives reality to what is, after all, largely a fable of poetic imagination. She has to invent a voice for Patroclus himself, as he is the narrator of the novel. She has to find a way to make the many elements of myth and legend in the Homeric story both everyday and simultaneously still romantic. And she succeeds absolutely brilliantly. As a reader, you don't even stumble when you realize that Achilles' mother was a goddess, or that the boy's mentor during their adolescence on a Greek hillside is a centaur. You simply get caught up in the lyrical writing and in the strong sense of time and place, what the boys wore, what mealtimes were like, how rooms were furnished, what weather dominated those ancient lives. And there's one thing more. It is desperately hard as a writer to sustain your grip on a reader's attention when that reader knows, because of her or his own reading, how a story will turn out. Just as we know, for example, that Anne Boleyn will lose her head, So we know that Patroclus will die before Achilles. So it is really skillful to keep our attention as completely as Madeline Miller does, all the way to the end. And as I said, at the time of her win, Homer would be proud of her.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Prasanna, welcome back.
In this extract, Patroclus, desperate not to lose his beloved Achilles to war, seeks out Thetis, a cruel sea goddess and Achilles' mother, to test her prophecy. When dawn came, he rose stiffly. "I must go and tell my mother," he said. He was pale, and his eyes were shadowed. He looked older already. Panic rose in me. "Don't go," I wanted to say. But he drew on a tunic and was gone. I lay back and tried not to think of the minutes passing. Just yesterday we had had a wealth of them. Now each was a drop of heart's blood lost. The room turned grey, then white. The bed felt cold without him and too large. I heard no sound, and the stillness frightened me. It is like a tomb. I rose and rubbed my limbs, slapped them awake, trying to ward off a rising hysteria. This is what it will be every day without him. I felt a wild-eyed tightening in my chest like a scream. Every day without him. I left the palace, desperate to shut out thought. I came to the cliffs, Skyros' great rocks that beetled over the sea, and began to climb. The winds tugged at me, and the stones were slimy with spray, but the strain and danger steadied me. I arrowed upwards towards the most treacherous peak, where before I would have been too fearful to go. My hands were cut almost to blood by jagged shards of rock. My feet left stains where they stepped. The pain was welcome, ordinary, clean. So easy to bear, it was laughable. I reached the summit, a careless heap of boulders at the cliff's edge, and stood. An idea had come to me as I climbed, fierce and reckless as I felt. Thetis. I screamed it into the snatching wind, my face towards the sea. Thetis. The sun was high now. Their meeting had ended long ago. I drew a third breath. Do not speak my name again. I whirled to face her and lost my balance. The rocks jumbled under my feet and the wind tore at me. I grabbed at an outcrop, steadied myself. I looked up. Her skin was paler even than usual, the first winter's ice. Her lips were drawn back to show her teeth. "You're a fool," she said. "Get down. Your half-wit death will not save him." I was not so fearless as I thought. I flinched from the malice in her face. But I forced myself to speak, to ask the thing I had to know of her. How much longer will he live? She made a noise in her throat like the bark of a seal. It took me a moment to understand that it was laughter. Why? Would you prepare yourself for it? Try to stop it? Contempt spilled across her face. "Yes," I answered, "if I can." The sound again. "Please." I knelt. "Please tell me." Perhaps it was because I knelt. The sound ceased and she considered me a moment. "Hector's death will be first," she said. "This is all I am given to know." Hector. "Thank you," I said. Her eyes narrowed and her voice hissed like water poured on coals. "Do not presume to thank me. I've come for another reason." I waited. Her face was white as splintered bone. "It will not be so easy as he thinks. The fates promise fame, but how much? He will need to guard his honor carefully. He's too trusting. The men of Greece, she spat the words, are dogs over a bone. They will not simply give up preeminence to another. I will do what I can. And you, her eyes flickered over my long arms and skinny knees, you will not disgrace him. Do you understand? Do you understand? Yes, I said. And I did. His fame must be worth the life he paid for it. The faintest breath of air touched her dress's hem, and I knew she was about to leave, to vanish back to the caves of the sea. Something made me bold. Is Hector a skilled soldier? He's the best, she answered, but for my son. Her gaze flicked to the right, where the cliff dropped away. He is coming, she said. Achilles crested the rise and came to where I sat. He looked at my face and my bloodied skin. I heard you talking, he said. It was your mother, I said. He knelt and took my foot in his lap. Gently, he picked the fragments of rock from the wounds, brushing off dirt and chalky dust. He tore a strip from his tunic's hem and pressed it tight to staunch the blood. My hand closed over his. You must not kill Hector, I said. He looked up, his beautiful face framed by the gold of his hair. My mother told you the rest of the prophecy. She did. And you think that no one but me can kill Hector? Yes, I said. And you think to steal time from the fates? Yes. Ah. A sly smile spread across his face. He'd always loved defiance. Well, why should I kill him? He's done nothing to me. For the first time then, I felt a kind of hope.
Wonderful, thank you very much. In 2013, the actress Miranda Richardson chaired the judging panel. Sadly, Miranda can't be here tonight because she's away filming, but I'm delighted that her fellow judge, the writer, author, thinker, Natasha Walter, is here in her stead. And their choice was May We Be Forgiven by A.M. Holmes. Natasha.
Yeah, it's sad for Miranda Richardson that she can't be here tonight, but it's great for me to be part of this wonderful celebratory event and to be able to talk just for a couple of minutes about this book, A.M. Holmes' May We Be Forgiven, which is a book that just constantly surprises me whenever I look back at it. If I say that it's a story of a suburban American family who are torn apart in this crazy explosion of violence, in which George, the brother of the narrator, first kills a family in a car crash and then attacks his own wife when he finds her in bed with the narrator, Harry, you would assume it's probably quite a dark and disturbing book. And in many ways, you would be absolutely right. The violence in this book is deadly. And perhaps worse than that, it's completely meaningless so much of the time. There's no remorse, there's no justification for it. And I think maybe it's the knowledge that A.M. Holmes deals with such dark themes, with this kind of interpersonal violence and abuse, this kind of dark underbelly of American life, which means that she is often seen as a very kind of challenging writer. And I think she sometimes struggled to break through to the really wide audiences that she deserves, that some of the writers that we're talking about tonight have broken through to. And I think that's also one reason why the prize night in 2013 felt so exciting to me and my fellow judges, because that's one of the lovely things that prizes can do. You know, they can open out, bring readers to a writer that they might otherwise be passing by. And if you do take the plunge into this book, and please do if you haven't already, because despite its harsh reputation, you really are in for a treat. Despite the darkness, it's an incredibly witty book. It's laugh out loud funny, and I'm not going to read any of the funny bits because that's going to be done in a minute. And it's also, in the end, it's a very warm book. It takes place in that kind of suburban American landscape that we're all kind of familiar with, you know, even if we've never lived there, those empty amusement parks, over-furnished houses, restaurants filled with artificial flavors, shopping malls stuffed with junk. It often seems like a very almost inhumane world. But A.M. Homes manages to bite through that coldness and that inhumanity, partly with that satirical edge, which you'll hear in a minute. But it's also this humanity that in the end she brings to this tale. Harry himself, the beleaguered narrator, he goes on this journey through the book in which he rebuilds relationships with people in his family, and also with strangers, just with passers-by, waiters, shop assistants. And he does that with this sort of observation that becomes so tender, the way he accepts people, sees their vulnerabilities with a real warmth. And I think looking back at the book and thinking, so where does the genius lie? I think it's in that. It's in Harry's often almost naive, childlike outlook. He's this middle-aged academic. He's weary. He's seen too much. He's done too much. And yet he manages to look at the world as if he's kind of seeing it for the first time. And in the end, as you move towards the end of the book, you realize it's a book that isn't just about violence. It is also, it's about love, and it's not just about how families fall apart. It's also about how they stick together. So despite the apparent hopelessness that you feel at the beginning, by the end of it, you trust A.M. Homes, and you think, yeah, maybe we will be forgiven.
Stanley.
I have to say, I'm missing one page from this, which is the very last page, and I don't know if anybody has... Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure we've got time for the whole book.
Sorry, it's a bit small.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Thank you. Great. Okay. I was just going to make it up, but... No, nobody would know. That's the thing. She would know, I guess. Yeah. So this extract is from the beginning of the novel. Here, Harry Silver is at a Thanksgiving dinner in the home of his taller, smarter, younger brother George and his family. May we be forgiven. An incantation, a prayer, the hope that somehow I come out of this alive. Was there ever a time you thought, am I doing this on purpose? I'm fucking up and I don't know why. Do you want my recipe for disaster? The warning sign. Last year, Thanksgiving, at their house. 20 or 30 people were at tables spreading from the dining room into the living room and stopping abruptly at the piano bench. He was at the head of the big table, picking turkey out of his teeth, talking about himself. I kept watching him as I went back and forth carrying plates into the kitchen, the edges of my fingers dipping into unnamable goo, cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes, a cold pearl onion grizzle. With every trip back and forth from the dining room to the kitchen, I hated him more. Every sin of our childhood, beginning with his birth, came back. He entered the world 11 months after me, sickly at first. Not enough oxygen along the way, and was given far too much attention. And then, despite what I repeatedly tried to tell him about how horrible he was, he acted as though he believed he was a gift of the gods. They named him George. Geo, he liked to be called. Like that was something cool, something scientific, mathematical, analytical. Geode, I called him, like a sedimentary rock. His preternatural confidence, his divinely arrogant head dappled with blonde threads of hair lifted high, drew the attention of others, gave the impression that he knew something, People solicited his opinions, his participation, while I never saw the charm. By the time we were 10 and 11, he was taller than me, broader, stronger. You sure he's not the butcher's boy? My father would ask jokingly, and no one laughed. I was bringing in heavy plates and platters, casseroles caked with the debris of dinner, and no one noticed that help was needed. Not George, not his 2 children, not his ridiculous friends, who were in fact in his employ. Among them a weather girl and assorted spare anchormen, and women who sat stiff-backed, hair sprayed like Ken and Barbie, not my Chinese-American wife, Claire, who hated turkey and never failed to remind us that her family used to celebrate with roast duck and sticky rice. George's wife, Jane, had been at it all day, cooking and cleaning, serving, and now scraping bones and slop into a giant trash bin. Jane scoured the plates, piling dirty dishes atop one another and dropping the slimy silver into a sink of steaming, soapy water. Glancing at me, she brushed her hair away with the back of her hand and smiled. I went back for more. I looked at their children and imagined them dressed as pilgrims, in black buckle shoes, doing pilgrim children chores, carrying buckets of milk like human oxen. Nathaniel, 12, and Ashley, 11, sat like lumps at the table, hunched, or more like curled, as if poured into their chairs, truly spineless. Eyes focused on their small screens, the only thing in motion their thumbs, one texting friends no one has ever seen, and the other one killing digitized terrorists. They were absent children, absent of personality, absent of presence, and except for the holidays, largely absent from the house. They had been sent away to boarding schools at an age others might have deemed too young, but which Jane had once confessed was out of a certain kind of necessity. There were allusions to non-specific learning issues, failure to bloom, and the subtle implication that the unpredictable shifts in George's mood made living at home less than ideal. In the background, 2 televisions loudly competed amongst themselves for no one's attention, one featuring football and the other the film Mighty Joe Young. I'm a company man, heart and soul, George says, the network's president of entertainment. I am ever aware 24/7. There is a television in every room. Fact is, George can't bear to be alone, not even in the bathroom. He also apparently can't bear to be without constant confirmation of his success. His 12+ Emmys have seeped out of his office and are now scattered around the house, along with various other awards and citations rendered in cut crystal, each one celebrating George's ability to parse popular culture, to deliver us back to ourselves ever so slightly mockingly in the format best known as the half-hour sitcom or the news hour. The turkey platter was in the center of the table. I reached over my wife's shoulder and lifted. The tray was heavy and wobbled. I willed myself to stay strong and was able to carry out the mission while balancing a casserole of Brussels sprouts and bacon in the crook of my other arm. The turkey, an heirloom bird, whatever that means, had been rubbed, relaxed, herbed into submission, into thinking it wasn't so bad to be decapitated and to be stuffed up the ass with breadcrumbs and cranberries in some annual rite. The bird had been raised with a goal in mind, an actual date when his number would come up. I stood in their kitchen, picking at the carcass while Jane did the dishes, bright blue gloves on, up to her elbows in suds. My fingers were deep in the bird, the hollow body still warm, the best bits of stuffing packed in. I dug with my fingers and brought stuffing to my lips. She looked at me, my mouth moist, greasy, my fingers curled into what would have been the turkey's G-spot, if they had such things, lifted her hands out of the water and came towards me to plant one on me. Not friendly. This kiss was serious, wet, and full of desire. It was terrifying and unexpected. She did it, then snapped off her gloves and walked out of the room. I was holding the counter, gripping it with greasy fingers, hard. Dessert was served. Jane asked if anyone wanted coffee and went back into the kitchen. I followed her like a dog wanting more. She ignored me. "Are you ignoring me?" I asked. She said nothing and then handed me the coffee. "Could you let me have a little pleasure? A little something that's just for myself?" She paused. "Cream and sugar?"
Thank you very much, Stanley, and thank you, Natasha. 2013 was a year in between our sponsors, and we were very, very fortunate to be helped out by various donors in that year who managed to make sure that we could finish talking to our new sponsors. So many of those donors are here tonight, both anonymous and the ones that had their names out there. So just to say thank you to them, because without that, some of the amazing novels in 2013 would have never got their moment in the sun. 2014 was, of course, the beginning of our wonderful new relationship with Baileys, who brought an enormous amount of passion and flair to the prize. The chair that year was the director of the Girls' Day School Trust, Helen Fraser, and they chose A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing by Emma McBride. Helen.
Well, A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing has had a really extraordinary history. Many of you will know that most of the major publishers all the major publishers who saw it turned it down. And in the end, it was published by a small press in Norwich, Galley Beggar Press. But it obviously had something because it began to pick up notices and prizes and awards. I think it had already won 2 smaller prizes when we saw it. And of the 158 books that we read, it immediately leapt out. I remember the excitement, the emails among the judges when we read it. It just stood out as something extraordinary and different, and it went effortlessly onto the shortlist. Now, the shortlist had some really amazing books by people like Donna Tartt and Chimamanda Adichie. They were books of much greater substance. They were longer. They were highly polished by very experienced authors. But there was something about the rawness and the energy and the emotional intensity of this book that none of us could ignore. And in the end, after a very long and sometimes anguished discussion, went on for 4 hours, shortly after midnight, we all universally concluded that this had to be the winner. So what is it that makes this book so extraordinary? I think there are several things. It's written in an astonishing style and language that Emma has created. People have called it Joycean, but it isn't really Joycean. I think it's like a half-formed language, like the half-formed girl. And at moments of great intensity in the book, it's as if the language fractures and breaks up. When you begin to read it, you think, how on earth am I going to cope with this? But literally, by page 5 or 6, you are completely held and gripped. The story is set in Catholic Ireland, in very Catholic Ireland. This is not a book that you come out of feeling good about the church. It's the story of a small boy who has a brain tumour, and his very devout mother is told that he's going to die and there's nothing she can do. She prays and prays and prays, and the prayer and the chemotherapy hold the tumour down, and he survives and comes home. But he's damaged, he limps, he can't speak very well, he's intellectually not very bright. And she's pregnant with our heroine. And the father decides that it's all too much, and he goes, and they never see him again. He dies several years later. So this little girl comes into this world with this damaged brother for whom she develops an incredibly anxious, passionate adoration and protective adoration. A mother who is quite hostile, a vile grandfather, and an uncle who comes to visit when she's 13 and rapes her. There is nobody in her life who gives her anything, any support, any love, any consolation. And what happens after the rape is that she decides that she's going to use her body both to achieve power. So when her brother is bullied by the boys in his class, she decides she's just going to sleep with them all. They're shocked, amazed, horrified, delighted. But she uses sex as power, and then when she's at university, she goes on random trips to pick up strangers and sleeps with anybody. And what you sense in the book is what begins as an exercise of power becomes in the end an exercise of self-punishment. She cannot get over the guilt about what the Catholic Church is saying to her about everything, but also about the condition of her brother. The book is agonizing to read, and yet it has extraordinary lyrical passages. She's wonderful about landscape, about water, about beaches. You almost can't bear what she does to herself, and yet you cannot stop reading. I've already blown what happens at the end on Woman's House. I won't do that again for those of you who haven't read it. But all I can say is I've never read a book like this. I don't think anybody who's read it will ever forget it. You may find it almost unbearable, but this girl, this half-formed girl, brings you into her life, and you will never regret reading this book. Thank you.
And to read from A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing, please welcome back Sheila Hancock.
I need a sip of water before this one. From the very first page of this novel, we're plunged into the intimate thoughts and feelings of our isolated protagonist. For you'll give her name. In the stitches of her skin, she'll wear your say. Mammy, me? Yes, you. Bounce the bed, I say. I say that's what you did. Then lay you down. They cut you round. Wait and hour and day. Walking up corridors, up the stairs. Are you all right? Will you sit, he says. No, I want, she says. I want to see my son. Smell from Dettol through her skin. Mops, diamond floor tiles, all as strong. All the burn your eyes out if you had some. Her heart goes pat, going dum-dum-dum. Don't mind me, she's going to your room. See the... Jesus! What have they done? Jesus! Bile for... Titles burn. Shh! All over. Mother, she cries. Oh no. Oh no, no, no. I know. The thing wrong. It is called nosebleeds, headaches, where you can't hold. Full mugs and dinner plates, she says, dear up. Ah, young, he says, give thy child a break. Fall off swings, can't, or grip well, slipping in the mud. Bang your poor head, wrapped up white and blood come through. She feels sick of that. Little boy head. Shh. She saw it first when you couldn't open your eye. Don't wink so long. Wind'll change and you'll stay that way. I'm not, Mammy. It's got stuck. She pull it open, hold it up. I can't. It's all fall down. And no, Holy Family on a Saturday night. He is leaning, you are sleeping, she the chair, me whirl about. Listen to the doctor chat. We done the best we could. There really wasn't much. It's all through his brain like the roots of trees. Sorry. Don't say that. He's running out, I'm afraid. I'm afraid he's running down. You should take him home, enjoy him while you can. He's not. He is. Can you operate again? We can't. Shush. Something? Chemo, then. We'll have a go at that. Gethsemane, dear Lord, hear our prayer hour. Please, intercession. Night in hospital beds, faces on the candle wick, liner on the knees. Please, don't God take our Holy Mary, Mother of all, humbly we beseech you. You white-faced, feel the needle go in. Feel fat, juicy poison young boy skin. In your arteries, eyeballs, spine, hands, legs. Puke its cells up all day long. No, Mammy, don't let them. Weeks for you, weeks it, scared and boiled and wet the bed. Dark trees outside for me when it weather rains. She praying in a coat until I am froze. Heart chapel kneelers, bare need, real repents. She does. And our father was, where? Somewhere there, I think. There's good news and bad news. It's shrunk. He's saved. He's not. He'll never be. So like it, lump it, a short breath's what you've got. Jesus in her blood that minute. Rejoice, Sacred Heart of Christ. But we'll never be rid, do you understand? He says. Shush, she says. Shush. Your pink face make that sitting up the best thing she's ever done. Watching you growing hair, scabby over slices where scalpels were. Don't look. Telling what's the time and where you are makes her happy, makes our father walk down corridors alone. He says, I can't be. Waiting for it all the time. I'd give my eyes to fix him, but the heart cannot be wrong and wrong. And she, like calmest Virgin Mary, sitting on the bed, hands warming up her sides for, what are you saying? Breath. Going. Leaving. But he's just stopped dying. This one's to come. Please don't. No, I won't stop you. Could never make you do a thing. You'll support us. Aren't you great? Oh, the house is mine. It's for the best. For who? You? Me? Bored my body up. I'm not for loving anymore. I'll live for housework, dressing kids, and you for mortgage, new shoes, spuds. Can't live short hope, but gas bills long and paid on time too. Oh, so kind. Aren't you the fine shape of a man? He left her with a £50 note. Take care. Stroke, combing full untidied hair. Thinking I think of you and me, our empty spaces where fathers should be, whenabouts we might find them and what we'd do to fill them up. But time did continue still. Where's Daddy? Gone? Why's that? Just is. And yelp she at the strength growing to your tips. Poke belly of baby that's kicking is me, full in myself, bustling hatchery. And I love swimming to your touch, lay on the lining for your strokes, for your secret pressed hellos. Show my red foot. Look there. Baby, when you're born, I pick your name. See, you and me were busy with each other long before I came. She was careful of you, saying, let's take it slow. Mind your head, dear heart. And her God said, thank God for her gasp of air, for this grant of nurse I will, learning you our Father's art. And when you slept, I lulled in joyful mysteries, glorious until I kingdom come, mucus stogging up my nose, scream to rupture day, fatty snorting like a creature, a vinegar world I smelled. There now, a girline, isn't she great? Bawling, oh, now you're safe. But I saw less with these flesh eyes, outside almost without sight. She asking after, and I'm all fine, hand on my head, her hand on my back, dividing from the sweet of mother flesh that could not take me in again. I curled there, learning limb from limb, curdling under hot lamps, sorrow lapped. I'm so glad your brother's lived, that he'll see you. It'll all be, but something's coming, wiping off my begans, wiping all my every time. I struggle from the smell of milk now, going dim, going blank, going white.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sheila. And that now brings us up to date, our current panel. This year's panel, 2015, was chaired by the Director of Liberty and author herself, Shami Chakrabarti, who famously, of course, was once described by the Sun newspaper as the most dangerous woman in Britain. And they chose How to Be Both by Ali Smith as their winner. Shami.
Yep, so it's 2015, and I don't need to detain you for too long. You'll be delighted to hear before we get the result. But what a wonderful evening, what a wonderful prize. Kate, thank you. Can we applaud Kate? It's been such a pleasure. You appreciate that your freedoms are in such safe hands at the moment in this country that it's been nice to have something to do with all my extra leisure time this year. And my fantasy book club pals were Laura Bates and Grace Dent, Helen Dunmore and Kathy Newman, and we chose this wonderful, wonderful book. Virginia Woolf and James Joyce died in the same year. Before they died, they had a secret love child who grew up to be Ali Smith. The first of those statements is a fact. The second is not a fact. It's a historical impossibility. But we lovers of great fiction know that it's no less truthful for that. So how to do justice to how to be both? It's a mind-bending, gender-bending, time-bending, form-bending work. It is 2 stories and one. The story of a Renaissance artist and the story of a contemporary teenager. Which comes first? The one that comes first chronologically, or the one that you come to first as the reader? Who knows? And that is the greatness, that's almost the best way I can sum up the greatness of this book that requires so much of us in a way as readers and is so accessible nonetheless. And the payoff is amazing. This is a book about surveillance, topical. It's a book about grief and loss, and nothing that I've ever read has been so touching and truthful in that regard. So I think I want to thank my own now departed mother for teaching me how to read. It was worth it to read something and share something like this. I want to thank all of you who support this prize, who read and write and buy books, like real ones like this. I no longer take bottles of wine and chocolates and flowers to the dinner parties of my fellow middle-class, middle-aged friends. I take books instead. And I will have piles of this one for a very long time, and I encourage you to do the same. Thank you, Ali Smith, for How to Be Both.
And for the final reading, we're going to have a reading from both the historic and the contemporary part. So to round off the evening, Sia and Sheila.
This final extract is a reading in 2 parts. Let's start with George, a young girl, recently bereaved, living in present time. Consider this moral conundrum for a moment. George's mother says to George, who's sitting in the front passenger seat. Not says, said. George's mother is dead. What moral conundrum, George says. The passenger seat in the hire car is strange, being on the side the driver's seat is on at home. This must be a bit like what driving is, except without the actual, driving. Okay, you're an artist, her mother says. Am I, George says? Since when? And is that a moral conundrum? Haha, her mother says. Humour me. Imagine it. You're an artist. This conversation is happening last May, when George's mother is alive, obviously. She's been dead since September. Now it's January. To be more precise, it's just past midnight on New Year's Eve, which means it's just become the year after the year in which George's mother died. George's father is out. It is better than him being at home, standing maudling in the kitchen or going round the house switching things off and on. Henry is asleep. She just went in and checked on him. He was dead to the world, though not as dead as the word dead literally means when it means, dead. This will be the first year her mother hasn't been alive since the year her mother was born. That is so obvious that it is stupid even to think it, and yet so terrible that you can't not think it, both at once. Anyway, George is spending the first minutes of the new year looking up the lyrics of an old song, Let's Twist Again. Lyrics by Cal Mann. The words are pretty bad. Let's twist again like we did last summer. Let's twist again like we did last year. Then there's a really bad rhyme, a rhyme that isn't, properly speaking, even a rhyme. Do you remember when things were really humming? Humming doesn't rhyme with summer. The line doesn't end in a question mark. And is it meant to mean literally, do you remember that time when things smelt really bad? Then let's twist again, twisting time is here. Or, as all the sites say, twisting time. At least they've used an apostrophe, the George from before her mother died says. I don't give a fuck about whether some site on the internet attends to grammatical correctness, the George from after says. That before and after thing is about mourning, is what people keep saying. They keep talking about how grief has stages. There's some dispute about how many stages there are. There are 3 or 5, or some people say 7. It's quite like the songwriter actually couldn't be bothered to think of words. Maybe he was in one of the 3, 5, or 7 stages of mourning too. Stage 9, or 23, or 123, or ad infinitum, because nothing will ever not be like this again. In this stage, you will no longer be bothered with whether song words mean anything. In fact, you will hate almost all songs. But George has to find a song to which you can do this specific dance. It being so apparently contradictory and meaningless is no doubt a bonus. It will be precisely why the song sold so many copies and was such a big deal at the time. People like things not to be too meaningful. Okay, I'm imagining George in the passenger seat last May in Italy says at exactly the same time as George at home in England the following January stares at the meaninglessness of words of an old song.
In this second extract, we ask you to kindly imagine that I'm a dead painter. I've been dead for 500 years, and right now I'm coming soaring back up through the ground to life again. Oh, this is a mighty twisting thing, fast as a fish being pulled by its mouth on a hook, if a fish could be fished through a 6-foot thick wall made of bricks, or an arrow, if an arrow could fly in a leisurely curl like the coil of a snail, or a star with a tail, if the star was shot upwards past maggots and worms and bones and rockwork, as fast coming up as the fast coming down of the horses in the story of the Chariot of the Sun, when the bold boy drove them though his father told him not to, and he did anyway and couldn't hold them. He was too small, too weak. They nosedived, crashed to the ground, killed the crowds of folk and a field full of sheep beneath. And now me falling upward at the rate of 40 horses. Dear God, old father, mother, please spread extempore wherever I'm meant to be hitting, wherever your target, begging your pardon, urgent, a flock of nice, soft, fleecy, just a cushion. Ow! What, that just caught my what? On a ouch! Dodge a hew, biff, bash, ow, mercy! Wait, though. Look, is that sun? Blue sky, the white drift, the blue through it, rising to darker blue, starting with green-blue underpaint, add indigo, under lazurite, mix in lead white or ashes, glaze with lapis, same old sky, earth again, home again, jiggity down through the up, like a seed of a tree with a wing course. When the roots, on their way to the surface, break the surface, they turn into stems, and the stems push up over themselves into stalks, and up at the end of the stalks, there are flowers that open for all the world like eyes. Hello? What's this? A boy in front of a painting? Good. I like a good back. The best thing about a turned back is the face you can't see stays a secret. Hey, you, can't hear me? Can't hear? No? My chin on your shoulder right next to your ear and you still can't hear? How well? Old argument about eye or ear being mightier all goes to show it's neither here nor there when you're neither here or there. So call me Cosmo, call me Lorenzo, call me Ercole, call me unknown pater of the school of whatever you like. I forgive you. I don't care. Don't have to care. Good. Somebody else can care. 'Cause listen, once an old man slept for winters tucked in a bed with my Marsyas, early work gone forever, linen canvas rot, stiff with colours on top of his bedclothes. He hadn't many bedclothes, but my Marcellus kept him warm. Nice, heavy, extra skin kept him alive, I think. I mean, he died, yes, but not till later and not of the cold, see? No one remembering that old man, except I just did, there. Though very faint. The colours now. Can hardly remember my own name. Can hardly remember anything.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, could you give an enormous round of applause to our actors, Stanley Tucci, Sia Kiwa, Pujana Gujrana, and Sheila Hancock. Thank you. And before we make the announcement, just a couple of other thank yous to all of our judges here on the stage, but there are many other judges here in the audience who've given up their wonderful time and their wonderful thoughts to support the prize. To the staff here at the Piccadilly Theatre who've looked after this rather shabby group of book people, not these ladies and gentlemen, you understand, but those who were here before, we were rather shabby. To producer of Woman's Hour, Lucinda Montefiore, and the whole team there who've done 2 amazing weeks of programming. Of course, to our partners Book Trust and to the Reading Agency, to Waterstones who've supported the prize so well over many, many years, Polly Whitten and the team at Froy's, Organ Nagel and the team at Bailey's, the prize managing director Harriet Hastings, Amanda Johnson, the prize patrons, donors and board, and in particular Joanna Pryor, who has chosen and curated and worked with the authors for the readings tonight, and that is no mean feat. Most of all, our thanks to the authors. Not only those of the books that are here, but there are many other authors shortlisted, not least in the audience. And it is their writing that inspires us, moves us, delights us, changes us, and makes our hearts sing. And that is what this prize is about, celebrating the beauty of words and originality and imagination and ambition. So we've heard 10 extraordinary and different novels. Novels about sex, about food and about food, about love, about war and the consequences of war, faith and the consequences of faith. We've heard what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a child. We've heard different ways of writing those emotions and ideas and stories, and 10 extraordinary different voices that have enriched all of us who have read those books. And the best way to honour writers is to buy their work. And we hope that you will go from tonight and not only try all of the books that you have not yet read that are of the winners, but also many of the other extraordinary novels on the shortlist, because it is a very wide group. But finally, it is my very great honour to announce that the novel chosen by the chairs of judges of the past decade to stand as the best of the second decade of the Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction is Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Now, I'm afraid Chimamanda couldn't make the journey across from Baltimore tonight, but I'm delighted to say that she did find time to record a short message for us. Chimamanda.
Hello, everyone. I remember the evening when I won the Women's Prize for my novel, Half of a Yellow Sun. I remember that there was a lot of champagne, which made me very happy. I remember that I was worried about falling down in my particularly high heels. I also remember just being very happy to win the prize. I remember the sense of goodwill. I remember having a lot of respect for the other books that were on the shortlist. And so today, to be selected as best of the best in the past decade is such an honor. I feel sad that I'm not able to be there, but I want to say how very much it means to me to be selected for this. This is a prize I have a lot of respect and admiration for, because I think that over the years it has brought wonderful literature to a wide readership that might not have found many of those books. I have a lot of respect for the books that I've won in the past 10 years and also for the books that have been shortlisted. And so I I feel that I'm in very good company. I'm going to miss the champagne. I wish I were there. And I think I would have found myself even higher heels to wear this evening. But sadly, I'm not able to be there. But this is an honor, and I am very grateful, and I'm very happy, and thank you.
And so to accept the special edition of the Bessie, which is the award given to every winner of the prize, could you please welcome back to the lectern Muriel Gray, the chair of the panel in 2007.
I won it. Yeah. Yes, it's very Thank you. Thank you. This is the closest I'm ever going to come to holding this.
I noticed it themes with your quote.
Yeah. I didn't win this. I think it's a fantastic thing. All the incredibly eminent and amazing articulate women that you've heard tonight talking about their books. One of the best things about judging this prize is we got to read each other's prize-winning books. Some we'd already read, some we hadn't at all. But I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that Chimamanda's book is a really important book. I know that sounds pompous. It's not, because if I can just finish by saying one of the best things she's done as an artist, I think, is to remind us that nearly 50 years on, the same kind of political and religious and every kind of tension is tearing the world apart. And we're trying to simplify it into the good guys and the bad guys. And if one of the marvelous things that her book does with its amazing humanity is remind us that everything is about the individual. You can't make a black and white thing. There's with no shades of grey. She did that in Shed Loads, which is why her book is important. It's a beautiful book. All the books you've heard about are beautiful and important books. But it's a shame she's not here, because when she picked up this prize in 2007, she was hysterical. And she did have the best heels on. So on her behalf, thanks, and thanks to everybody as well. And thanks for giving us the opportunity to judge these books again, because we've had the best time ever. I wish this was mine. I can't write that well.
Thank you very much, Muriel. And, of course, the listeners to BBC Radio 4's Woman's Hour also chose Half of a Yellow Sun as their choice, so there is a virtuous circle here. That's it. You can keep in touch with the prize through our website, our Twitter, and the other social media platforms. There's details in your reading guides, which you will be given on the way out, or might have been given in the way in. Oh, you've all been really polite with them. I assume nobody had got them, because you weren't waving them about the place. We, of course, are gearing up now for Coming of Age, our 21st, which will be 2016. I'm delighted to say that the chair of that judging panel, Margaret Mountford, is here tonight, and I think a couple of the other judges are too, because there are always, I'm delighted to say, exceptional, ambitious, wonderful novels written by women from all over the world that men and women who love reading will enjoy to read. It is now my solemn and final duty, of course, to tell you that the bar is open. The Stalls bar is open. Chimamanda's champagne is in there. There is Bailey's in there, of course, ladies and gentlemen. So do all please stay and raise a glass to the next 20 years of the Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction. Thank you and good night. Thank you.